Hello, everyone. My name is Amos Geva. I'm going to be moderating the discussion today with our lovely guest, Daniela Völker, who is the creator behind this film, director, producer, and basically carrying this project on from the beginning until the end. Hello, Daniela. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Maybe let's start off with how you began to get involved with this topic. With documentary filmmaking, often these things are a long process and a lot of research is involved in it, definitely in a historical topic. If you could tell us a little bit about what started off this project for you and how it evolved into the different directions that it took.
Yeah, this was a very unusual project because I got put in touch pretty much in the first week of the COVID pandemic when you couldn't leave your house or meet anyone. A friend of mine kept saying, I want you to meet Maya Lasker-Wallfisch, who is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, Anita Lasker-Wallfisch. And she was interested in telling her story as a second generation person who felt affected by trauma resulting from experiences her mother had during the Holocaust, which was almost 2 decades before she was born. So we had a chat. I mean, I thought it was very interesting because I'd never actually heard of transgenerational trauma. And because it was the lockdown and we were all at home, I had some time. So I started doing some research on the internet and came across a really astonishing document, which is the autobiography of Rudolf Höss, Commandant of Auschwitz, which is where Anita, Maya's mother, had been an inmate. And it was an incredible document because he was both perpetrator and prime witness. And then on the basis of that, I found his grandson, who was basically Maya's generation, pretty much same age. And when I eventually managed to talk to him, he had very similar experiences, but from the other side of how his family past had affected him. So at that point, it became clear that maybe I was looking at two parallel stories of a survivor and a perpetrator family. And it took me about a year until I got to meet the son of the commandant, Hans-Jürgen, who had spent his entire life not really denying the past, but ignoring it, trying to suppress it. So I filmed him reading his father's autobiography for the first time, later on going to Auschwitz for the first time since he left in December 1944. So, you know, it was a real journey. And as we went on this journey together with Anita and Maya Lasker-Wallfisch and Kai, the grandson, and Hans-Jürgen Höss, you know, it became clear that really the two story strands were coming closer and closer and they should meet. So I would say it was a very collaborative process in which, you know, everyone had a say, and the story at some point led us all towards this one meeting in London, which was extraordinary. And I have to say also unexpected, because actually Anita, Maya wanted her mother Anita to come to Auschwitz with her to meet the Höss. And Anita said, I don't want to go. My Auschwitz is not your Auschwitz. I want them to come to my house to have cake and coffee. It's very German, Kaffee und Kuchen. So, you know, that really surprised all of us. And it was, I think, an incredibly generous and interesting reaction Anita had, because, you know, her stance is that we must all talk to each other. So she wanted to lead by example and do it on her own terms in her territory.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the most powerful moments of the film. I mean, this encounter is so charged historically, personally, multi-generation. It's a really powerful moment, and wonderful to see it in a film, despite the difficulty, of course. I want to go deeper into this topic of this maybe unique part of this film, which is the decision to portray both narratives of the perpetrators and the victims, or so to say, the next generation of those, because obviously the commander himself was not available. But this is obviously a decision that carries weight with it, also this heavy responsibility. And of course, when we have seen other films that have dealt with the exact same topic, there was also a strong decision only to portray the perpetrator. Maybe you can say something about your perspective as a filmmaker and how you approach this topic, why it was important for you to bring both of them.
Well, I have to say it is one of my interests. I have made other films in which I look at two sides of the same story, the dirty war in Argentina, the genocide in Rwanda. I think, you know, the perpetrator and the survivor stories do belong together, because you wouldn't have a survivor, or a victim indeed, without a perpetrator. And, you know, they're like this different sides of the same coin. And to me, it felt very important to kind of, in a way, portray both sides, because, you know, the survivor found themselves, in this case, Anita found herself in this situation through no fault of her own, you know, by really an accident of birth, that she was born a German Jew in Silesia. But the perpetrator family, I mean, of course, the son and grandson also found themselves in a situation through no fault of their own. But in a way, Rudolf Höss is like a character in my film. Through his autobiography, he talks to us from beyond the grave. And he was very much not someone who just happened to find himself, you know, he made everything happen. And that's the sort of really, in a way, terrible thing about Auschwitz, is that someone imagined it. You know, his boss, Himmler, said, you have to exterminate a large part of Europe's Jews, make it happen. And he did, you know, he had to come up with industrialized murder and apparatus of death. So in a way, I did feel that it was important to not isolate one or the other. And, you know, with documentaries, you always want, I guess, people to walk away with a need or a wish to find out more, with questions. You know, a film shouldn't have all the answers. And I felt it was, even the fact that you're asking, you know, should these two stories go together? You know, that's a very interesting question to walk away with. I mean, my answer is I do think they ought to, you know, they're kind of intrinsically linked. And I think we learned from the similarities as well of the experience, especially of the second generation who grow up with deafening silence over many decades.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Focusing on this question of the second or third generation trauma, I have a question regarding the preserving the history, the narratives of the Holocaust, and also what one should perhaps learn from them. There's a sentence that is being said also in the film, that people who weren't there can't really understand fully what it was. And this is a feeling that also I went through when I was visiting Auschwitz myself, in real life, even not only through a film, but you know, it's something that really cannot be imagined. Do you have any thoughts on this issue of the living witnesses on either side of perpetrator or victim are slowly going away, unfortunately, and soon, very soon, will come a time where we will not have any eyewitnesses living? How do you think that may impact the way we think about that history, and the way we think of also what should be learned from it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think once you lose the direct witnesses, things become very much kind of black and white newsreel or old footage, you know. And I think that's the real importance of capturing testimony, and also unusual, less heard testimony like that of the Höss, who were really the only civilians living at Auschwitz. And, you know, they were children, but children themselves have stories to tell, and what they remember or not is part kind of in a way of what we should be recording. So I think it's really, really important while we can to you know, capture their testimonies, and also to, you know, have meetings like we had. I mean, that was, as Anita said, a historic moment, which neither she and certainly not Hans-Jürgen Höss, who'd never met a Jewish inmate, would have ever imagined possible even a few months before it happened. So I mean, about the generations that followed, I remember when I started this, one of my children, who was tiny at the time, I mean, it took me so long to make this film that by the time when I started, the youngest was in primary school, and when I finished, the eldest was in university. So but my youngest asked me, as you know, we were on Zoom, so she overheard the conversation, and she said, but you know, if it was her mother who suffered, why is the daughter affected? And that really stayed with me, because, you know, I didn't really understand it either. So I think that's a line of inquiry that will perhaps become more important. And hopefully we have kind of, in a way, opened the floodgates a bit. I mean, of course, while we still have first-hand testimonies, first-hand witnesses alive, you know, we concentrate on them. But it is important to think, I mean, what effect does it have to have a mother who survived hell, a father who was responsible to this hell, for this hell, and to, you know, how does it affect their children and possibly even grandchildren? So perhaps, you know, we will find a new way of telling these stories through those who were very indirectly involved, because it was the grandparents.
Mm-hmm. That's actually also a good segue to another topic which I was curious about. When you work on a documentary film, very often you know, you come with a set of ideas or with a sort of perspective, and you try to bring it to life. But obviously, a very deep and heavy research process is involved in it. What were the things that, through the work on the film and the research, surprised you, or you discovered that you didn't come to the project with in the beginning?
Well, I guess the main thing was the Höss autobiography, because I'd filmed in Auschwitz before. So I had been there. I had seen the gallows. When you make a film, you obviously, it's like shining a very bright light onto one thing. We weren't at that point looking at the Commandant. So I sort of vaguely remembered seeing the gallows, but I never really thought about it. And then, you know, when I came across this autobiography, what really astonished me was that Höss was the first Nazi in a prominent position to remember something, you know, because most people couldn't remember anything, or they certainly pretended not to when they were interviewed. I mean, with Höss, he just poured it all out. And then the autobiography is this tightly written document. You see it in the film. We spent something like 7 hours filming it. You know, it was a very tricky process. But I kind of thought, I mean, how extraordinary. You hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were, you know, as you say in English. It's just incredible to hear this voice, you know, of the man responsible for all this. And as you walk around, especially Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was essentially a death camp, you know, it is so overwhelming. And I remember when I was walking next to Kai Höss, he was looking around saying, oh my God, this is horrendous. Who came up with this? And I had to sort of remind him, well, actually, it was your grandfather. So I think that really astonished me, because I had read lots of books about Auschwitz, and I'm sure it would have been in the footnotes or in the bibliography. But, you know, when you read a book, you don't really kind of go and look at their sources. So so much of what we know because Rudolf Höss wrote it down before he was executed. So and I think it is important, you know, because what's the most troubling thing about him is that he wasn't a psychopath. I mean, the American court psychologist who examined him deemed him to be normal, you know, with dissociative tendencies. but a normal person. And that's quite worrying. You know, in a way, you'd almost prefer him to be a psychopath, because then you'd say he's a freak of nature. But the fact that this is a man who's maybe not very pleasant or nice, but like anyone you could bump into on the street, ambitious, loves his family, wants to get ahead in his job, to the point that he doesn't care, you know, that actually he's killing, exterminating, as he calls it, you know, which is what you would do with vermin, lots of people, more than 1 million of them. So I think that's something, you know, that we all have to bear in mind. A few years ago, I met the psychologist Philip Zimbardo, and I remember he was talking about how some people, given the situation, they can be good or evil. And, you know, he's a situationist, I guess. And in a way, that really applies to Rudolf Höss. Had he not met Himmler and not gone into the concentration camp system, perhaps he would have been Germany's most efficient car salesman, you know. So that's, in a way, really troubling. And also, obviously, for his son, because Hans-Jürgen Höss was a car salesman. So you sort of think, you know, it very possibly could have gone another way in different times and different circumstances.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if this is fair to question regarding the children and the grandchildren of the perpetrators, but there are a few quotes in the film that really stuck out to me during the viewing. One of them is actually from Anita's side, when she's brought the document from Höss. She says, "What a find! Now who can deny that?" And this is a quote that really stuck to me, because I thought to myself, nobody denying it needs the proof in order to stop denying it. And yet, when you hear the quote from the son, he's talking about Auschwitz and his childhood. "I never saw anything bad in Auschwitz. I had an ideal childhood in Auschwitz." You know, these kind of things that really are like a punch in the face. And these kind of things are really interestingly intertwined, because I wouldn't go as far as to say he's guilty of not knowing, because obviously as a child and in those times it wasn't possible. But through 60 to 70 years of history, there's enough time to reflect and to decide to look into this past or not. And I think this is a very broad, common question amongst not only German families, but maybe any families of Nazi families, which are not only German, of looking into that family history and, you know, how many people actually know what their forefathers or fathers or mothers did. So those kind of two things really stuck out to me, and I was just wanted to mention that, and wondering if you have any comments on that.
Yes, I think Anita, when she said, "Who can deny this?" Having looked at the first interrogation document of Rudolf Höss, which by sheer coincidence, someone had emailed Maya 2 days before we did this particular bit of filming. I think what she meant is, you see, because people in Auschwitz, the Germans did try to destroy as much as they could and get rid of all the documents. So the gas chamber was destroyed. In fact, I mean, there were 4 gas chambers in Birkenau and 1 in constructions. They were destroyed. But one was rebuilt, which was the one closest to the Höss house. So it was the first gas chamber in Auschwitz I, Stammlager. And people, because the Soviets rebuilt it, people kind of deniers latched onto this, and they said, well, it's not true. It was a post-war construct. And there in the book, he talks about, well, first of all, being tasked with building all these gas chambers, but then the process of gassing, how long it takes. So in a way, I think she probably would have, when she talks of deniers, she would be thinking of people who say it didn't happen. There were no gas chambers. It was all made up after the war. And obviously, I mean, this document was compiled in March 1946. So it was after his arrest and before he was summoned as a witness to the Nuremberg trials. So it is, you know, again, from the horse's mouth, his statement. And, you know, Anita's point is now you hear it from the man responsible. So that is quite interesting. With Hans-Jürgen, I mean, it's rather interesting because you see, Hans-Jürgen was 7, his sister Pippi was 10, and they cannot remember anything bad. Everything was lovely. There were theater plays and music, and, you know, they just had a jolly good time in Auschwitz. Which, when I first heard the words idyllic and lovely in the same sentence as Auschwitz, you know, it's quite grating. You sort of go, oh my God. But actually, what's really, really interesting is that I believe him. I think after the war, in May 1945, the Hearst family had a rude awakening because they suddenly realized they had fallen from grace. The world and the values they believed in no longer existed. So, you know, they were spat at for a brief time until everyone kind of conveniently forgot. So I think, you know, it's almost like a sort of collective amnesia. And in the case of the Hearst, it may very well be, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but Kai, his son, wonders, is it a way of self-preserving, of being able to continue living? And, you know, I think it probably is, because Hans-Jürgen never denied the Holocaust or even the fact that his father was commandant. I mean, when I first met him, he said to me, well, he deserved to die because he was the man in charge. He was responsible, but he didn't really know the details of what was going on. He was in an office block, you know, signing orders, stempeln, you know, stamping, so favorite German pastime. And it was only when he read the autobiography, he actually realized, I mean, not only was his father everywhere, he came up with the whole thing, you know. So yeah, it is interesting. I mean, at one point, Hans-Jürgen said to me, he spent his whole life suppressing, verdrängen, and every now and then things would bubble up to the surface and he'd suppress them again. And he did this movement. So I think, you know, because we filmed for a few years, he started kind of in a way reflecting on things like that, which had come naturally to him and he'd never really given any thought to. So that was, in a way, one of the kind of, I guess, great advantages we had, that we had time and people could really think about things that they hadn't ever considered. And then I'd come back and interview them and, you know, they'd tell me something that they'd never thought about before, which, you know, they had reflected upon.
Mm. We're coming close to the last part of the questions, and I'd like to ask you, the film deals obviously very, very thoroughly with the past, but it's very much so, at least in my perspective, also a film about the present and nonetheless about the future. And another quote from the film that stuck to me in this context was when Anita is saying that anti-Semitism is flourishing. When a survivor says that now, today, what does that mean? What is that supposed to do to us as viewers, or what does it do to you as a filmmaker dealing with this?
Well, I think in a way you have to struggle not to feel despair, because, you know, you think ultimately, I always thought what happened in the 1930s and 40s was very much limited to a period in time and a region. But actually, in a way, the anti-Semitism Anita was talking about was far more widespread, and it was kind of an undercurrent, really, that she picked up on, you know, way before I did, actually, because you see, I'm not Jewish, and I mean, we live in London, you know, obviously it was the lockdown when we first started filming, so people really didn't go out or communicate that much. But I think Anita sort of picked up on lots of separate incidents, some of them very small, which were reported, you know, sometimes only in the Jewish press. And obviously, you know, with the last year, recent geopolitical events, you know, the 7th of October and the war in Gaza. I think, again, you know, there has been a shift. So I think people like her are profoundly saddened to have to be living through this point in time. And, you know, that, as she says in the film, you know, human beings behave atrociously badly on all sides, and we don't seem to be learning that much. But I hope, I mean, one thing the film really, we wanted the film to do was to make people think. And we showed it in Tel Aviv to an audience at the documentary festival, Doc Aviv. And a rabbi and his wife came to see it. And then the next day, the rabbi's wife rang our team, and she explained that the film had made them think, because they lived in Jerusalem but had never met their Palestinian neighbors. And following Anita's lead, they decided that they would go to a charity and get them to set up meetings with Palestinians who lived near them, so they would get to kind of talk to each other. And, you know, I thought in a way that's exactly what Anita wanted, to set an example, to kind of meet, if you like, the other side, the other people who are not like you, to see what they're like. And actually, that was very moving. And I know that she was really touched, Anita, when she heard about that, you know.
That is indeed touching, and I think that it also correlates to what she says towards the end of the film of, you know, it's not about forgiving, you know, you can't forgive that, but it's about talking and understanding, which is getting more and more difficult these days in the world. You know, people are less interested in talking and more interested in blocking discussions. So I think this is a really, really important point, especially for the present and the future. And thank you for bringing that into the film, and thank you for the amazing work and dedication throughout the film, and also for joining us today. If there's anything else you'd like to add, this is the moment.
No, I mean, thank you very much, because actually I think it's so important. You know, these films are really, really difficult to make. They're difficult to get the access, to get the finance, you know, they're kind of, we all do it really, I think, documentary filmmakers, as a labor of love. You know, I mean, while I was making this film, I was having a day job, you know, earning money, making documentaries for streamers or TV. And this was what I did in the holidays and weekends. So in a way, it means a lot that people watch it. And, you know, I hope the people watching will tell others, you know, because like that, we can ensure that these really important stories continue to be told.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in that context, also, I'd like to thank very much Film Independent and the Claims Conference for putting this screening together. Thank you for the audience, and thank you again, Daniela. And I wish everybody fruitful discussions and further research after this film.